Walk into almost any kitchen in the world, and you'll find salt. It's ancient, universal, and so essential that entire empires once fought over it. Now open a different cupboard, maybe one labeled Asian cooking or seasonings, and you might find another white powder with a far more controversial reputation, MSG. At a glance, they look nearly identical. Both dissolve instantly, both boost flavor, and both get blamed when food tastes too much. So what's really going on here? Are salt and MSG doing the same job? Is one better, worse, or misunderstood? To answer that, we need to step back and look at what these seasonings actually are, where they came from, and why one became a villain while the other got a free pass. Right here, on History of Simple Things. Salt, chemically known as sodium chloride, is about as old as cooking itself. Humans have been using it for thousands of years, not just to make food taste better, but to preserve it long before refrigeration existed. Salt draws moisture out of food, slows bacterial growth, and turns raw ingredients into staples that can last for months. That made it incredibly valuable. In fact, the word salary comes from salt, because Roman soldiers were sometimes paid with it. Flavor-wise, salt doesn't really add a taste of its own so much as it amplifies what's already there. It suppresses bitterness, sharpens sweetness, and makes savory notes stand out. Without salt, most food tastes flat and unfinished. But salt comes with a downside: sodium. Too much sodium is linked to high blood pressure and heart disease, which is why salt intake is constantly under scrutiny. Still, because salt feels natural and familiar, it rarely gets treated like a health menace, just something we're told to use in moderation. Monosodium glutamate, or MSG, sounds intimidating mostly because of its name. But chemically speaking, it's just sodium attached to glutamate, an amino acid that naturally exists in foods like tomatoes, cheese, mushrooms, and even breast milk. MSG was first isolated in 1908 by Japanese chemist Kikuchi Ikeda, who was trying to capture a savory taste he noticed in seaweed broth. He called that taste umami, now recognized as the fifth basic taste alongside sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. MSG doesn't just make food salty, it makes it deeply savory, meaty, and satisfying. The controversy started decades later, when anecdotal reports linked Chinese restaurant food to headaches, sweating, and discomfort, a phenomenon that became known as Chinese restaurant syndrome. Despite numerous scientific studies failing to find consistent evidence that MSG causes these symptoms in the general population, the stigma stuck. MSG became framed as artificial, foreign, and suspicious, even though chemically it behaves almost exactly like naturally occurring glutamates. Here's where things get interesting. Salt and MSG don't do the same thing, even though people often lump them together. Salt enhances flavor broadly. It makes sweet foods sweeter, savory foods richer, and bitter foods more tolerable. MSG, on the other hand, specifically targets umami receptors on the tongue. It doesn't replace salt, but it can reduce the amount of salt needed. In fact, many chefs and food scientists use MSG strategically to lower total sodium content while keeping food flavorful. This is because MSG contains significantly less sodium by weight than salt, so when people say MSG is worse than salt, the chemistry doesn't really support that claim. MSG intensifies savoriness without overwhelming other flavors, while salt is more of a blunt instrument. Used together, they can actually create a more balanced dish with less sodium overall. The fear surrounding MSG largely comes from perception rather than evidence. Double-blind studies, where participants don't know whether they're consuming MSG or not, have repeatedly shown that most people cannot reliably detect MSG or experience symptoms from it. Meanwhile, excessive salt consumption has well-documented health risks, yet it rarely sparks the same level of panic. That doesn't mean MSG is a miracle ingredient or that salt should be demonized. Both contain sodium, and both should be used thoughtfully. The real issue is quantity, not identity. A diet overloaded with ultra-processed foods, whether they use salt, MSG, or both, is far more concerning than a home-cooked meal seasoned intelligently. In a strange twist, MSG may actually help people eat healthier by making vegetables, soups, and low-fat foods more appealing without relying on excessive salt or fat. So if the science is relatively clear, why does MSG still feel controversial? Part of it comes down to language and history. Salt feels ancient and natural, even though it's purified and processed. MSG sounds synthetic, even though it's derived through fermentation, similar to how yogurt or soy sauce is made. Cultural bias also played a role, with MSG becoming associated with foreign food in Western countries, while the same compound went unnoticed when naturally present in Parmesan cheese or tomatoes. Over time, that association hardened into fear. Once an ingredient gets labeled as bad, it's incredibly hard to shake that reputation, even when the evidence says otherwise. In the end, MSG versus salt isn't really a battle, it's a misunderstanding. Salt is essential, powerful, and historically important, but easy to overuse. MSG is a targeted flavor enhancer that boosts savoriness and can actually help reduce sodium intake when used wisely. Neither is inherently evil, and neither is magic. They're tools, and like any tool, the outcome depends on how you use them. The real takeaway is that flavor doesn't have to come at the cost of health, and sometimes the ingredient we fear most is just the one we don't fully understand. When you strip away the myths, MSG turns out to be less of a villain and more of a misunderstood supporting character, quietly doing its job, right alongside salt, in kitchens around the world. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.